Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Ask the Experts session for Red Hat and Microsoft's partnership. We're just going to go through a couple slides to start real quick, and then we'll get to any questions you have and provide you all the information we can, and we can follow up afterwards if you need more information from us. So the idea is we're covering, everything around hybrid cloud and how Red Hat and Microsoft work together to make that possible for enterprises. So it's just everything around our integrated solutions, everything from Arrow to SQL Server, everything. So the idea is with this session is you can use chat or the Q&A to ask questions. Upvote any questions you want answered so we can kind of prioritize them. We'll verbally answer questions, and then we can provide follow-up afterwards if required. The session may be recorded, and of course, as with everything with Ignite, please adhere to Microsoft's code of conduct, which is no discrimination, no bullying. We're all here to learn. We're all here to have a good time. So no reason to get mean about things. This session, there's myself and Nicholas, who we do a lot of cloud evangelism, and we work with Microsoft in the field all around the globe with partners and clients. So we have a lot of experience with all these technologies. So today's topics, it's kind of like, just to give people an idea, it's Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Openshift, Arrow, and just Openshift self-managed, and any kind of topics, SQL Server on a premise or on Azure, and then there's Ansible, and there's also some things like how we work with SAP and other areas of interest, so just kind of get your mind going. And then there's just just some reminders. We've got a partner site inside Ignite. We've got a draw for an Amazon gift card, other Red Hat swag, and our just kind of landing page. We'll bring this slide up again at the end, just so you have an idea, how you get further in touch with us if you want to. So let's see. So feel free to ask questions. And
so Vince, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, like what you work with, the different technologies, a little bit about your role within Red Hat and how it interfaces with Microsoft, so that everyone kind of has a general idea.
Yeah, so my role is a global partner, principal solution architect, which is a really long way of saying I spend my days making sure all our sales reps and account executives know how to use Microsoft products, have ways to demo the products, and we're kind of like their tech support if they're working with Microsoft in the field, and they just kind of want to make sure Red Hat and Microsoft products work together seamlessly. So I spend my day kind of putting together the jigsaw puzzle, which is hybrid cloud between Microsoft and Red Hat's products. And Nick, you do a lot of the same things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a cloud strategy evangelist, which is basically just a fancy way of saying a cloud nerd, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I work with all the certified cloud providers, the Microsoft Azures of the world, the Google Clouds and AWSs, but I also work with a lot of the ISVs, SIs, and MSPs, specifically to help them, widen their skill sets, introduce them to emerging technologies, with a focus on Red Hat products and solutions. So this could be things like distributed applications, serverless, stateless, containers, Kubernetes, distributed storage, middleware, and it's both from a business solutions perspective as well as from a technical perspective. So some of those questions are, well, what's the best way of implementing a solution, or what's the difference between rolling my own version of Openshift versus using a solution like Azure Red Hat Openshift, which is our managed service of Openshift. So fielding a lot of those questions, helping customers understand what's the right consumption model for them, what's the right products for them, and then how they could actually implement those solutions to take advantage of them.
And what are some of the more common questions customers are coming to you're seeing lately in the field around how to use, say, Openshift, or when to use Openshift?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of customers are obviously aware of Kubernetes and are aware of containerization kind of being the next type of infrastructure platform that everyone is looking at adopting. Everyone's at different places in their journey, right? So some people are just now starting out. Other individuals are way down the stretch and they already have containerized applications and they're trying to look at like scalability. So it really depends. It depends on the size of the customer. It depends on where they are, if they're looking at greenfield and brownfield. So actually, I saw we already have a question that came in, which is, hi, what's the best practice for deploying multi-factor authentication on-prem, preferably with Azure MFA, Radius, or other means? So Vince, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, sure. So if you're using Azure Active Directory and it's MFA add-ons, so if you're using on-premise, then we've got a PAM, which is proven, tried and true, built into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. If you're using OpenShift, it's got some SSO authentication, so you can use SSO to connect to Azure Active Directory, and then it'll automatically use multi-factor authentication if it's enabled, which is nice. So then it's seamless to you. You don't have to worry about it. You just configure OpenShift to point at AAD for your as your identity provider. There's other options, like Red Hat has a SSO offering, which has kind of enterprise on-premise SSO, where if you've got anything from Workday to Salesforce to pick your other product, Red Hat SSO can kind of be that on-premise bridge, which will allow it to connect to Azure Active Directory to provide that authentication. And if multi-factor is enabled, it'll work. So it works pretty seamlessly.
So to kind of like add on to that, like what are you seeing when it comes to customers and their authentication mechanisms? First of all, like what does OpenShift support, and then what are you seeing customers using for adoption?
Most of our customers that are using Azure Active Directory are all in the cloud. We don't have a lot that pull it on premise. It's just because of the nature. Our biggest enterprise customers, they've got so much on-premise equipment that they're kind of using traditional Active Directory more than anything, and then they just bridge to Azure Active Directory. But yeah, it's all the traditional things like that have gone through, like PAM and a lot of SAML federation and stuff to get everything up and running with it. But yeah, most customers we have them with Microsoft Active Directory, plug it into their Red Hat systems for authentication, because one directory is kind of the best practice, right? So
another question that came in: what are some of the biggest difficulties that people seem to be having with virtualizing their environment? So I can tell you, like with the customers and the partners that I interface with, that first of all, that's a kind of a complicated question, because it depends. When you say virtualizing, are you talking about virtualizing like moving from like bare metal legacy to like actual virtual machines, or like a combination of like moving to next generation like containerized applications and such? But I would say some of the biggest difficulties are talent. So finding individuals that are able to actually help customers technically transition from these legacy-based applications, these monolithic applications, to like a distributed application. So taking that application and all of its dependencies, tearing it apart, and then moving that into type of container platforms. So I would say that's number one, the biggest thing, right? Lack of individuals. The second piece is lack of technology. So it's really easy to go and deploy a Kubernetes environment. I mean, you can find scripts. There's all sorts of different solutions that are out there. Where I see a lot of customers struggling also is like day 2 and beyond, right? So they get the environment stood up, they start virtualizing these applications and containerizing them, they start creating scale sets and triggers, and then they start coming to a point where they're not getting good visibility, or they're experiencing latency issues, and they're not necessarily sure how it's best to debug those types of issues. Like, where is that latency coming through? Is it ingress? Is it egress? Is it a specific container or pod, or is it like backend connections to other services and such? What are you seeing, Vince, when you talk to customers when it comes to difficulties with virtualizing their environments?
It's a lot of the same things. So if this ties into another question that's in there, which is around lift and shift, how people can just move into the environment. So it's a lot of upfront planning, right? If you want it, if you have a Red Hat image that's fairly customized, you're going to need to learn how to do a golden image on Azure to move your image up, so you can use the same kind of deployment methodologies and satellite and anything else you're using in Azure, so you can keep your practices going. Some of the mistakes people make is when they go to the cloud, they try to go 100% cloud right away, which is great, but then you've got two sets of operational practices, and then you start to fall down and your people aren't comfortable and stuff. So it's about moving your practices in as is close you can to the cloud, and then just kind of iterating to take on some of the best practices, like being able to turn down development environments on the weekend to save money, and just little things like that you can pick up. But one of the big mistakes people is they try to go 100% cloud when they're only used to operating on premises, and it's people, process, and technology, right? The technology is good. People are the most important part, and the process is how you keep them sane. So the less processes you can have and the more streamlined you can make them as you move, the better everybody's life is.
Let's see, another question that came in. When moving on-premise Red Hat servers towards Azure, what are the next steps do you recommend after the migration has been completed?
So after you've moved all your up, if you've done a golden image, or if you've done it starts to look, it just starts to get into optimization and things like, can you go one step farther and containerize that application instead of having a whole VM, right? Which gets a little more lightweight and easier to schedule. If you've got, it's just starting to take advantage of the clouds as your practice after lifting it, because on-premise works great because you've got the hardware, it's always there. But once you get to the cloud, you start to have that elastic capability where it's not just scaling up that matters, it's being able to scale down, right? So you got slow points of the day, slow points of the evenings, to start to tune your applications and be able to resize images on the fly, kind of thing, to take more compute capacity or less depending on your actual need, without having to reinstall or buy new hardware. It's just, that's the kind of stuff you can start to think about, instead of just how can I fill up the next server, how can I get more onto what I have. It's starts being able to think of, it's all disposable, so let's just kind of take advantage of the elastic plasticity. So how about you, Nick? What do you see with customers doing that?
I mean, I think the first step, obviously, when you're moving workloads over, you obviously want to make sure that you're installing the Azure agent. Second piece would be, hardening of the operating system if you haven't already done that. So, it depends on what tools you're specifically using to if you're doing a lift and shift or a refactoring, right? If you're deploying on a net new, a gold image, and not using some type of third-party component to actually, copy block for block over from, a virtual machine, either on-premise or bare metal on-premise, into an Azure VM and create that virtual hard drive, right? And then attach that to an instance. You always want to make sure, one, that you're using the correct, performance profiles for whatever the application is. You want to make sure to install the Azure agent. Obviously, you want to make sure from a security perspective that you're enabling all the appropriate, permissions and access and ACLs, that root is being secured. You could utilize other solutions like Cloud Init and Ansible to actually run playbooks against that, to make sure that you're actually, using the right configuration management. So we have Red Hat Insights. Insights will actually kind of investigate a virtual machine configuration, and it'll tell you if there's drift, or if you should apply certain performance profiles, or let's say heap sizes are wrong or swap is wrong. Insights can actually take a look at a lot of that and make recommendations for you, and that's actually included as part of the Red Hat subscriptions.
Right, and Ansible itself is a good cloud-friendly solution because it's agentless, so you can spin up and down VMs all day, and Ansible can dynamically look up on Azure to see what VMs meet the labels you're looking for, and do the configuration checks, the management, the applying security patches to them that Insights recommends or Satellite recommends. And because it's agentless, it doesn't need to connect first to figure out how to talk. It can just dynamically look up your hosts, configure, and connect. So it's kind of the all-around solution. So you get into the cloud, and then you start looking at taking advantage of the dynamic capabilities, which Insights will tell you what you need to tune. Satellite can tell you what you need to patch, and Ansible can kind of take care of that backend management, whether it's OpenShift or Linux that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that also ties in. There's a question that came in that said, what would be the best method or tool to protect, secure, or manage the usage of root access, right? And all of those tools that we mentioned play into not just performance tuning, but also making sure that you're managing and protecting and securing all of your, your instances appropriately, that you don't have root enabled, or that you're, running instances without firewalls enabled, or whatever you want to consider it to be. There's a lot of like drift within environments. And that's why it's great having like tools like Insights and Ansible and Satellite to be able to either one, detect that there's drift within an environment, and then two, to remediate that drift. So obviously, root access is incredibly important. You should really only enable it like when you actually need to do anything that requires root. Otherwise, you could use, escalated privileges. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Vince.
Well, and that's one of the reasons with like OpenShift 4 and Arrow, for example, you don't have access to the host underneath unless you need it. You don't SSH those hosts almost ever now, because you dynamically spin them up and down based on your scaling rules. And with a machine operator inside Kubernetes, you can control what you need to on the machine without ever having to directly log in. So it's about building layers and layers of security. So it starts with the basics, firewalls, security groups, and that kind of stuff. But it gets to the point that with enough containerization and abstract and having abstract things and using services, that you don't even really need to have root access except a very small core group of people, so they can have insanely complicated passwords, and it really doesn't inconvenience anybody.
There also was a question that came in about Defender. I posted a response to that, and I also included a link specifically to the Microsoft KB article about deploying Microsoft Defender for endpoint for Linux manually. That actually was just recently updated on the 17th of February. So take a look at that. There's installer scripts, there's log installation, troubleshooting. There's a lot of information that's in there, so that should be very helpful. If you do have other questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. We're more than glad to help with that. Or obviously, you could always reach out to Microsoft as well, and they're happy to help.
Right, and when it comes to things like patching Linux and OpenShift now, everything's dynamic and it'll patch while staying online. There's almost no instances where you need to reboot anymore. So 24/7 critical applications, even kernel patching can happen live in most cases now. So we're to the point now that even without cloud in the mix, 24/7 is very real and very attainable with the latest versions of their product mix. So.
Another good question. Let's see. Major differences between running OpenShift in Azure rather than on Google Cloud.
Well, so this is where the fact is based on Kubernetes is kind of the secret sauce, like the secret weapon. It doesn't matter what cloud it's on. OpenShift is designed to work the same on every cloud or bare metal. Your operators and your developers work the same way. It's always it's cryo for the runtime. It's Tecton's in there for pipelines. Jenkins is in there if you really want to use it. Like all the pieces are the same, and we engineer it so it's got the same interface across all clouds. If you have a preference for Azure or GCP or one of the other evil giants that are out there, it'll work. OpenShift will work the same everywhere, and that's kind of our positioning in the market. We help you do that hybrid cloud. So you have to learn to do it one way, and it works everywhere. And and it's the same with all of the older generation of orchestrators like Swarm and all those guys have all switched to use Kubernetes now as well. So it's a matter of, we've got the longest experience, and that's why Microsoft and us are such good partners with products like Arrow, where we've got the expertise and we've been doing Kubernetes as long as Google has, and we're the two, kind of senior ranking people in the community. We've got the experience, we've got the expertise, and it's multi-cloud.
So another good question that came in. Interesting question. Does OpenShift support Swarm, or are there good docs resources on migration?
So Swarm is kind of is Docker's thing. So every 99.9% of Docker containers will run unchanged on OpenShift, can run unchanged on OpenShift. And if they don't, it's almost always security related, where Swarm and Docker don't enforce minimum security standards. Things like security context, like they'll use port 80 and just things that require root that don't need to, where we enforce best practices out of the box, where you'll run on port, say 8080, and then you use your ingress controller to map port 80 or port 443 to it. So your application doesn't need any extended privileges, and it allows easier patching, easier management, and more abstraction, to kind of add to those security layers. So you can feel more confident out of the box that your developers aren't exposing root access to things. So you should be able to take any Swarm application, drop it in OpenShift, and maybe fine tune a couple ports just to increase the security profile. Other than that, the application themselves work every time we've tried them. It's just kind of that environmental fine tuning.
So a random non-technical question, is the Red Hat swag only available in the United States?
I know we've shipped it all over the place. I get it. I'm in Canada, so it's not just in the U.S.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I mean, I've seen people in Europe purchase it as well, but
yeah, and I know we've had winners in other countries. We've FedExed them the winnings, so it's available anywhere.
What is supported Red Hat software for Linux HA clustering? I'm not sure if they're asking specifically about HA proxy, or I mean, there's a lot of things you could do for Linux HA clustering. I guess it depends on the application itself. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I mean, yeah, the gamut runs from how we handle it for SAP with clustering all the way through how we use HA proxy and OpenShift. So if you have an HA, or if you need high availability, we probably have a solution that meets your needs. It's more about how you want to do it and what your exact needs are. It's one of those technology things where the only answer is it depends, and then we need a lot more detail from you before we can give you the right answer.
What is the roadmap of Ansible on Azure as it pertains to Azure DSC and vice versa? We've noticed the current lack of support in DSC for RHEL 8. Is that making room for Ansible moving forward to eat up Linux management? I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, I don't have a clean answer to that. Things like desired state, there's just a long time to get a new operating system right. Like Red Hat 8 just got certified by the US DoD to meet its standards, and it's been out over a year. So it just takes a long time to get that kind of fine tuning right. And if most of your customers aren't on RHEL 8 yet on Azure, it makes sense why DSC doesn't support us yet. It's just a customer demand thing. Yeah, but Microsoft would be better to answer why they're not supported. But Ansible works great. There's an Azure collection. You can do almost anything you ever need to from Ansible to talk to Azure.
Can you please highlight key security considerations for OpenShift deployment?
Well, what layer are we talking? What do you think?
Yeah, I know. I was kind of thinking about that. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, you want typically, if you're concerned about security, you're going to want to be deploying private clusters versus publicly accessible clusters, right? Specifically, we're talking about, in any environment, whether it's in the cloud or not. I would say that's like number one, right? You don't want your Kubernetes dashboard and your API endpoints all being, publicly facing. So I would say, first and foremost, that's like numero uno. Vince, what would you add to that?
So kind of, if you just take OpenShift and just install with our IPI installer, which is installer provision infrastructure, it kind of is a good security positioning out of the thing. Like only port 80 and 443 are available, and 6443, which is the admin port. It kind of locks down everything else. It's on, there's private IPs. It's split over a couple of subnets. So out of the box, we try to have a good 80% meets 80% of requirements security posture, and then it just depends on your environment and what you want. Whether you've got, we're partners with Palo Alto if you want to use their firewall into the cloud for policy management. We're friends with Calico if you really need better network policies inside your OpenShift environment. So it really depends on your exact needs, but our positioning is we want to get you 80%, 90% of the way there with just our out of the box install. At any layer from container security right down to the operating system. And
I would throw on that, we have a lot of knowledge-based articles. Like, for example, I know that we have one that's architecting for HIPAA, security rules and best practices for that we actually publish. And we have one, I think, for FSI. We have one for, I mean, there's multiple different like industry verticals that we actually have where we actually,
and
kind
we're
of go
FIPS,
into.
yeah, and we're FIPS compliant now, so we've got articles on how to enable FIPS on all your operating systems, whether that's OpenShift or Red Hat 8. Like, we can get you to where you want to be with us and our partners. It's just a matter of not everybody needs that level of security, so we kind of try to hit the mass, the sweet point where most people's needs are met, and then you kind of specialize based on your industry or your requirements or your just desires. So.
Yeah, and I know, like, because I recently just went through this with a customer that was looking at, HIPAA compliancy. And so those essentially white papers / knowledge-based articles, whatever you want to consider it to be, they talk about everything from ingress to egress traffic isolation, third-party vendors that can be utilized, persistent storage life cycles, how to appropriately do cluster attached storage, spoofing and tampering and reputation and a bunch of other different stuff. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that, and I'll shoot you my info as well. So if you reach out to me, I can actually point you to any of the specific security constraints that you might be looking for. If there's like a certain industry or regulation, like it could be PCI compliance or SOX or whatever it is, I could probably point you to some of that documentation as well. Let's see. Is Red Hat officially supported to run on Nutanix AHV clusters?
That I don't know. I don't deal with Nutanix at all. I live in the land of Microsoft.
Yeah, so I know Nutanix runs the Acropolis hypervisor. Previously, it was a combination of Acropolis and VMware, but it's been a little while since I've done some stuff with Nutanix. I'll have to double check on that and get back to you. So I'm going to send you my contact info, and you can reach out to me directly, and I can find out the answer for you on that. My gut feeling is yes. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't, because Acropolis is actually a derivative based off of, I'm not sure if it's Fedora or not. I have to double check, but I know it runs KVM. And so I don't see issues per se. I just don't know if we've actually certified it to run on that hardware and vice versa. So I'm going to respond to that and send you my contact info.
And there's just one other question here on using Azure SQL Server and going from on-premise to the cloud. The biggest gotcha that I've seen is undersizing your I/O. Azure is not the best performing I/O if you're used to on-premise. It's until you get to very large disks. So don't be afraid to over provision and then scale back if you need to, because if you go in undersized, you're going to have more problems than if you try to right size it the first guess. Even the experts get it wrong the first time. Go too big and then shrink back your disk. That's the biggest gotcha we've found with that I've seen with Azure moving into SQL Server on-premise to the cloud.
Yeah, I would say make sure to obviously select manage disks and then always premium storage when you're looking at that. If you're not sure if you're going to be I/O constrained, especially with a database, right? So.
And they've got the ultimate storage now, or I think it's ultimate in a few regions, which is that much better. It would just go too big with storage and then do performance profiling, and if you can shrink, cool. But if you can't, it's easier to scale back than to have users screaming that it didn't work right the first time. So.
Is Red Hat for Raspberry Pi in the works?
We have an ARM 64-bit version. So in theory, it should be okay. I just don't know if we've ever done any actual testing or certification on it.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, I've kind of, kicked it around and tinkered with it, and it seems to run just fine. And it really depends on what you're specifically looking at doing, is what I would say. Because, you really would have to strip out a lot of packages and components and pieces to get it to be like a very lightweight, flexible release. But it depends on what you're looking for and what you're doing on your Raspberry Pi. If you're going to use it for Pi-hole or pfSense or something along those lines, I'm sure it's going to be fine. But really depends on what you're looking at. I actually had heard that there was somebody out there running an OpenShift cluster that they had set up on a group of Raspberry Pis. So, I mean, if they can get that up and running, I'm pretty sure you can get anything up and running. Let's see, other questions. I think that's all we have.
So yeah, so if just it was in the published at the close to the top. There's a link to our landing site, which has all the information you need if you need to get in touch with us.
Yeah, and we're more than glad. Like, you know, if you reach out to us, if you have any questions, if you need, you know, help when it comes to selecting technology components, pieces, general questions, whatever it is, you know, feel free to reach out. Like, we always try and make ourselves as available as possible. And you know, that's for everyone, for partners, customers, ISVs, doesn't necessarily matter who. We're more than glad to like either get you to the right people, or if it's possible, take care of it ourselves. So
right, because Red Hat's all about community, and you know, the community, we want to be a good member of the community, and we like being a member of the community. So if you need any things, we can reach out, help, and you know, we're always available. So.